Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. For this episode, I'm delighted to welcome back a friend of the podcast, Dr. Emma Seppala. Emma is a professor at Yale School of Management, and we are talking about her new book, Sovereign: Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos. Indeed, we are sovereign individuals, and quite often we need to be reminded of that fact. Sovereign is a word I've used many times with the people who see me, and I was thrilled to see that Emma dedicated an entire book to explore this crucial idea. She carves out a powerful path through scientifically validated strategies to feel more in charge of ourselves and our own lives. I loved this book, as did Dr. Dan Siegal and previous SuperPsyched guest, Dr. James Doty. So listen in as Emma and I talk about claiming your birthright as a sovereign person. Dr. Emma Seppala, a hearty welcome back to SuperPsyched.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's fun to be here.
So great to have you back. Last time we spoke about the happiness track, and you captured my attention because of a post. It's so funny how this world works. From Jim Doty, physician over at Stanford, who'd written a post describing a Harvard Business Review article you'd written many years prior that was still relevant and maybe all the more relevant now. I loved it. I reached out to you. I read your first book. Now we get to read your second book, which definitely has way more laughs in it than the first book, although the first book was wonderful. The second book does not disappoint you. So let's just say you are not a one-hit wonder. You are at least a two-hit wonder so far. And I have a feeling you're just beginning to show what you've got.
Thank you so much, Adam, for reading the books. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Likewise. So let's talk a little bit about how you decided on the word sovereign. What a great word. It's a word I use often in my psychotherapy practice. And having just finished my own book, I know what an incredible opportunity cost relating to time writing a book is. So to write such a book, you have to have total conviction. I know you're a mom, a wife, a cat mom, a professor. So in order to write about something, that's a really big deal. How did you decide to double down on the word sovereign?
You know, we live in a world, especially here in the US or in the Western world, where we have everything. We have safety, we have food, we have shelter, we have entertainment. I mean, you name it, we have it. And yet we are often locked into thought patterns, behaviors, addictions, ways of living that don't serve us and that keep us bound. And this book is an invitation to reclaim our sovereignty, our personal freedom, internal freedom, by building awareness of what's going on at every level, from our relationship to ourselves, to our relationship to our body, to our relationships with others, and so forth and so on. That helps us show up as the person we really want to show up as, because research shows that on our deathbeds, a vast majority of people feel like they didn't live the life they wanted to live. And that's tragic. And so this book is an invitation to reclaim our sovereignty. And we can do it. And there's science-backed methods we can use.
I'm so taken by the fact that you and I are very much alike. I love this expression, having an insurance policy that you will live your life while you're living, is the term I use. And you just basically paraphrased that just now. And so I'm just feeling a spectacular kinship with you. You also went into some areas that delighted me, because I've not really read a book by an Ivy League academic who was willing to even dip their toe in some of the topics you touched, including such things as intuition. But before we even get into that, let's hear your definition of the word sovereign.
Sovereign is having a life-supportive relationship with yourself. That is the short version. And in many ways, whether we realize it or not, we engage in a often life-destructive relationship with ourselves without even realizing it. We're getting trapped in ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of consuming that are standing in the way of us being able to show up, whether we live in fear or we live in self-criticism and self-loathing, or we are disconnected from our inner voice and the things we hold to be true. And whether or not we think we do this, most of us, to a certain degree, if we're not aware, we fall into those traps. And if we're really honest with ourselves, we can see it. And this book is meant to open our eyes to some of those ways. And I can go into the details of that so that we can reclaim our ability to live as ourselves in our full freedom, in our full expression.
And you were speaking indirectly about the things that distract us from knowing who we are, that tragically claim our lives while we're living, keep us from actually living in our center, living in our sovereign nation, living within our truths. And there is evidence, and I've done it, that we are less strong when we are untruthful to ourselves. You can try this yourself, and you may have done this already. And tell me if you have, trying to bench your max while saying something that is true versus saying something that is not true, or putting out your arm ramrod straight at a 90-degree angle to your body and saying something that is true while having somebody push down on the arm and saying something that is not true. We exert less energy when we're saying something that's not true. And what you are doing with this book is allowing people to find tools to claim themselves, to live authentically, to live with congruousness, is what I get. Is that consistent with your efforts?
Absolutely. And that's when you can show up as your most powerful. It makes complete sense.
What are the things that cause us to stray that we might not even be aware of? What are some of the common, as you see it, we lose sovereignty?
Yeah, the first chapter I go into is our relationship with ourselves, because I think that's the basis. And it's really fascinating, no matter what audiences I speak to, whenever I ask the question, how many of you are self-critical, 90 to 95% of people raise their hand. And if you look at psychology and how it defines self-criticism, it defines it as self-loathing. 95% of people walking around with self-loathing. What about that makes any sense at all? And some people might say, oh, well, self-criticism is good. It leads to self-improvement. I would say, hold on. Self-awareness is good. Like, oh, I'm not really great at stats. Like, maybe I need to hire a statistician to help me out. That's one thing. Self-criticism is the words you say to yourself whenever you make a mistake, whenever you fail, whenever you embarrass yourself, and usually those words are something like, you're such an idiot, you're such a failure, the whole imposter syndrome, all of that. And those are words you would never say to your best friend who just made the same mistake. To them, you would say, you're okay, you've got this, everyone makes mistakes, no big deal, right? So what makes sense about us being in a toxic relationship with ourselves? We complain about being in a toxic workplace or a toxic relationship, but most people are in a toxic relationship with themselves. And that is so heartbreaking, but it also makes people weak in the sense that, and here I think about Audre Lorde's quote. She's an activist, writer, author, poet, who said, self-care is not self-indulgence. It's an act of political warfare. I love that quote. As she was a self-described gay Black woman in a straight white man's world, fighting many battles on many fronts. And her quote is so powerful, because how are you going to show up on the battlefield of your life? You're going to show up limping because you kicked yourself on the way there? Or are you going to show up in shining new armor because you loved your way there? That's why I put that chapter first. Our relationship with ourselves is fundamental. It's fundamental. And we don't realize that we may be walking around with self-loathing because our parents did too, and their parents did, and everyone in society does. And so it just becomes normal. And yet it's a source of suffering, because no one can repair that hole in your heart that comes from a lack of friendship from yourself. And no matter how much love you look for on the outside, if you don't have that for yourself, there's suffering still.
I'm blown away by this idea of it being such a radical act, and it's the right path. And I'm glad that this is being lionized, because what was lionized when I was a child, and it may have been for you as well. I remember my typing teacher proudly talking about how he deals with his own deficits. And he'd say, I look in the mirror and I say, Jack, you son of a bitch. And meanwhile, you referred to that mode of action as being an inner terrorist. And I want us to talk, I like that term so much. We talk about the inner critic. You make it way more visceral. And I think it's about time that we recognize it. It's inner terrorism.
It's inner terrorism. And some people will think, well, that's how you're gritty. You just have to just be hard on yourself. But you're going to perform a lot better if you are not in a state of high sympathetic activation, fight or flight, because you yourself have been attacking yourself, right? So if a terrorist walks in the room with a loaded weapon, it puts you in fight or flight, no doubt. But if that person lives in your mind and is constantly berating you, you activate your own stress response. This is not an opinion. I mean, I'm looking at the data on self-criticism shows that it leads to greater anxiety, depression, fear of failure, less willingness to try again. That is the opposite of resilience. Whereas the data on self-compassion shows that you're more resilient, you have better mental health, you have better sleep, you have better relationships, because guess what? The way that you relate to your own self is how you're going to relate to those you love the most and want to hurt the least, because that's what happens, right? There's so many benefits to it. Self-compassion leads to resilience. So you want to be gritty, you want to be the best, you want to reach your dreams, then it's fundamental to have that very life-giving relationship with yourself. Some people might say, well, the gritty people get ahead too. Yes, but for how long?
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. I have been tripping on that fact for some time. I've been thinking, people talk to me about this college basketball coach who I will not name, but people who know about college basketball know this guy. And they say, well, what about this guy? And he's lionized. And I say, yeah, how long does he have his players? He has them anywhere between 1 and 4 years at most. And in the NBA, how many coaches that make it to the NBA finals comport themselves in that manner? Very few. The winningest coach in recent years is a guy I absolutely adore and who's been on the podcast, and that would be Steve Kerr. He's basically a real life Ted Lasso. And what does he do? He coaches people like Steph Curry to win championships, and he's taken them to the finals a lot in the last few years. He's one of the winningest people in all of basketball history.
Wow.
And he does it through this more Yoda-like Obi-Wan Kenobi style. And Chris Germer, who you mentioned in your book and who's one of the leading experts at Harvard on self-compassion and its clinical applications, who's been on the podcast, described it kind of consistently with the way you've been describing it as something that's been adopted by the Navy SEALs because you get more, faster, and better. And if the Navy SEALs have adopted it, maybe that's the badassery we need to really serve as a blurb for the power of it. There's no question in my mind that we perform better. And I'm looking at you, Emma. You've done fairly well for yourself. The little I know about you is that you did undergrad work at Yale. You went to Stanford, got a doctorate. You lived overseas in China, got a TED Talk. You've been published by, I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, the Harvard Business Review. You've written not one, but 2 books. And I'm guessing a lot of that has been fueled with this technology of self-compassion. And I was wondering if you could speak to it and how it's helped you do everything you do on top of being a mom, on top of being a wife, on top of being a cat mom, everything else that you've done. I mean, how has it fueled you?
Well, I definitely did not have self-compassion for many years. Absolutely not. And what I noticed was that I did get a lot done, but I burnt out. My health gave out. There were several years after my second baby was born that I was unable to almost do anything. And that's several years after that I started to develop this idea of sovereignty and really realizing, wow, I was doing all the things that I talked about in the happiness track. I have a strong practice every day where I do breathing, meditation, yoga. I do all the things that we know lead to well-being for sure, but I had still bought into ideas and concepts that were hurting me. And that's when I was able to start to shift that around. That's when this idea for the book came, because I realized, wow, these are the programs we're running in our minds. And I've seen firsthand how it can destroy you. And now the shift in the relationship to myself is one that I'm constantly aware of and working on. It's like we have to reprogram ourselves, but it is such a shift. It is such a shift. It's incredible how freeing it is.
Contrary to popular opinion, or perhaps even popular perception, without really having a formed opinion, it could even be argued that the least selfish thing we could ever do is invite more self-compassion into our lives, because the people in our lives will benefit from us being kinder internally, because we will probably be kinder externally and more authentically so.
we absolutely will be kinder to others. That's the irony of it, is that I love the research that shows that if you want better relationships with other people, have a better relationship with yourself.
Yes, so well put.
Yeah.
It never hurts to hear another point of view on self-compassion practices. What would you say would be a how-to of self-compassion that somebody could begin with a reasonably slight learning curve?
Listen to what your body needs, right? Listen to what your body needs and respond to it. Does it need sleep? Sleep. Does it need food? Eat. Whatever it's asking for. Because we're just learned to override it. That's just so basic. And I think that's a very pragmatic and practical way to just begin. And then later you can move to more subtler, right? Like, I'm feeling anxious. What do I need? Do I need to keep chugging away at my work and whatever? Or do I need to take a nap or meditate or exercise, whatever? Only you know what you need. But we have been taught to not listen.
It's so tragic. A baby, when a baby cries, is, I believe, communicating one of three things, and only one of three things: feed me, nap me, change me, change my diaper. And what we forget in these grown-up bodies is that within us is still a part of ourselves that needs us to listen just as we would to a baby externally. But we need to listen internally. That's really good. I often refer to it as a rock in our shoe. Would we walk better if we had rocks in our shoe? Or do we tend to walk better when we take them out? We know to take those rocks out of our shoe. Some of us continue to walk literally with rocks in our shoes and say, no, it's not worth it. And other people metaphorically do it all the time. I remember on day 2 of the AIDS ride, it's this long bike ride from San Francisco to LA. I didn't adjust my seat. It was off by 3 degrees to the right. And I got a spectacular saddle sore at the end of day 2. And I had 5 more days to go. Had I been willing to just get off my damn bike, and I knew it was there, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to take the 60 seconds. So instead, I spent several hours with a saddle sore that lasted me a few weeks after the ride. So come on. What you're asking for is seemingly small, and yet it's so hard for us to do. And I guess I wonder, in addition to it being perhaps perceived as a waste of time or self-indulgent, are there any other things that might get in our way as we're trying to behave in a more self-compassionate manner?
I think of it as programming, social conditioning, and it's keeping us bound. And it's run in generations, and it runs in societies, and it runs in the way we teach our kids if we're not aware. The most heartbreaking thing was during some hard years after my second baby was born, I must have said something like, I just can't do this, something around parenting thing. And then I heard my oldest son say something similar about something when he was upset. And I realized, wow, like the buck has to stop here or I'm passing this on.
Damn. I remember learning that concept of saying, this ends with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember working with a young woman who came from a long lineage of abuse. I mean, generations back. And she was beginning to behave in a manner that was not abusive, but was continuing a negative lineage with her children. And I remember watching her bravely look at her programming, to use your word. And she kept repeating throughout our work, this ends with me. And it was so powerful to watch it, at least while I was with her, working with her, watching it end with her.
Amazing. That's sovereignty.
That's sovereignty.
That's sovereignty. She's making the choice. It's like the story I share in my introduction of this woman who had, she grew up in an abusive, very poor rural background. And then she made it to the National Guard and said that was the proudest day of her life. She was finally part of something she felt proud of. She really believed in the values of brotherhood, community, service, all that stuff. And then when she was deployed to Iraq, she was in combat during the day, and her supervisor prostituted her at night at gunpoint and told her she wouldn't ever go home to see her baby if she said anything. I mean, a year of that. I mean, when she told me her story, I just had tears running down my face. I had never heard such a horrendous thing of combat during the day, war, and at night that. I mean, the hellishness of it all. And yet when I met her, she was barely a year or 2 out of that experience. She said, I just want to be a good mother. I just want to be a good wife. I just want to be a good person. And she had not an ounce of self-pity, victim feeling about herself at all. She was like, I'm moving forward. Now, she was in our study that we ran on the Sky Breath meditation for veterans with trauma. And she did say, I would be an alcoholic on the streets if I didn't do this. So it helped her with the trauma. I mean, trauma needs to be addressed, as you know so well. But that sovereignty in her eyes was powerful. She's one of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. To this day, wow. She was like, yes, all this happened and I own my life and I'm moving forward. And she's now one of a top leader at one of the biggest tech companies in this country.
Incredible. I remember reading that part in your book, and it was harrowing, to put it mildly. It was something I couldn't have actually conceived of. It was so beyond the pale. And I think about Viktor Frankl and his notions around sovereignty, his idea that when everything else has been stripped away, we have one final freedom, and that is the freedom to perceive the meaning of a thing. And all throughout sovereignty in the book or sovereign in your book, I was thinking about that. This idea that we are homo symbolicus, we get to determine what a thing means.
We do.
Let's go to another wild level here. Emma, it gave me great joy to see you talk scientifically about self-energy or energizing and ways to look at that notion, that idea that when a Debbie Downer walks in the room, it's perceived and it has an effect, and that we have the ability to change the energy within a room. It sounds very new agey, except for the fact that you address it as an academic very scientifically. Let's go for it. Let's talk about what does that mean?
You know, this term of energy vampire has been around for 30 years, right? It's an old concept. Judith Orloff, right?
Suck you by.
Yeah. But what was interesting to me is that there's research on the opposite phenomenon. And it's quite recent research in organizational psychology. So Kim Cameron and some of his colleagues looked at organizations like large networks of people and saw there were these micro pockets of super productivity. And what was going on here? Why were these people so good here? And it turns out there was one individual at the center of each of those pockets. And I remember Kim saying it's embarrassing as a scientist to say this. The only way we could describe it is that they have this positive energy. Think of them as sort of energy enhancers. And they literally created life around them. Just like you could think of an energy vampire or someone who drains you. There are people who, after we spend time with them, we feel energized, enlivened, inspired. And like you, Adam, for example. And this kind of thing was researched in the lab. And Kim saw that, wow, this is something we can train people in. And in fact, they did. They have trained organizations that were going downhill, whose leaders were mostly energy drainers. You could shift it. You can learn to be an energy enhancer or a positive energizer. It's so basic. And I mean, the story that I like to share about that is my friend Etel, who was in the jungles of Africa, and she was doing some activism there. And then all of a sudden her driver disappeared and she was told to get in a car with these two men.
Sorry.
I know that they were clearly her hitmen.
Listener, what you can't see is we're on Zoom right now. And for some reason, a Zoom function caused a whole bunch of balloons to be released. That was pretty hilarious. It was kind of appropriate since we're talking about this insane story, but go ahead, please continue the story.
And she had good cause to think that the people that she was being told to get in the car with were her hitmen, because the government of that country didn't want her to do activism there. They were getting kickbacks from the rubber companies that were causing deforestation that she was investigating. And there was these two men, giant men in military apparel that she was meant to drive with. And so she got in that car, and within the 3 hours it took to go to the airport, she actually not only made friends with them and connected with them in a way, but at the end of the drive, she got confirmation that they were her hitmen. But they actually not just shared their snacks with her, but saved her life. And at the end of that trip, they said, do not ever come back here. You are not safe here. And if you ever do decide to come back, to come over a land border and under our protection, stay with us. And what had happened here? How had she shifted this experience into a way that these men had become her protectors rather than her aggressors? Now, this is an exceptional case, and I'm not saying anything about all of those many people who've been taken hostage and so forth. This was a unique case, but Etel does have positive relational energy. She really does. She has mastered it. And just being around her is energy enhancing. It is uplifting. It is inspiring. And What is it exactly? Kim broke this down and he saw that it has a lot to do with values. If you're someone who lives with compassion, empathy, kindness, humility, forgiveness, generosity, integrity, people feel safe around you. And that's one aspect. And that's something you can fake. Like that's just got to be authentic. Otherwise, people see through that. But the other aspect of that is that they know how to fill their own cup. They're not pouring from an empty cup. And that goes back to the relationship with the self that we talked about earlier, too.
Basically, when I think about what you're talking about and a metaphor that I love, which is filling one's cup and something I use throughout my book quite extensively, this idea of sovereignty as it relates to this is so powerful. You're basically saying that here's this woman who was in harm's way in a way that causes the hairs at the back of my neck to stand up. She was able to access her inner light and shine it on these two guys. There was just no way they could kill her.
Yes. And as she connected with them in the car in that way, she started to ask them about their lives, and they started to share also about what was happening in their villages and how the water was getting polluted and everything. And she was able to then also share, that's why I'm here. This rubber company is ruining the land, and this, the deforestation is impacting the pollution and so forth and so on. And that relationship was born and became a powerful one in which her hitmen turned into her protectors.
It's incredible. While we were in the green room earlier, you and I were talking about Daryl Davis, one of my personal heroes, an African-American musician who purposefully goes to KKK rallies and has conversations with members and doesn't manipulate them, doesn't do the whole Obi-Wan Kenobi of this. These are not the droids you're looking for. He has real, just basic, I'm not pulling one over you conversations and finds out what they value. Lo and behold, and these are people who would want to kill him in theory and in practice. Thankfully, he's not been too much in harm's way, but he has helped over 200 men recognize that they were not living their values authentically, that they were not living in their own sovereignty. And here you are, just in the power of a word, sovereign. Like, I love one book titles, and when they really hit a bullseye, like you did, it's all the more amazing. This is one of the words that needs to be out in the zeitgeist. This is one of those words that can change people's lives. So we're going to go from self-care and energy into something else that I thought was very courageous of you to even touch with a 10-foot pole, and that is intuition. Let's talk about the science of intuition. Let's talk about how it relates to our sovereignty. I'm kind of blown away that you were willing to go there, and I thought it was great.
So in school and in society, we're taught to think logically, reasonably, and rationally, which is great. We need to do that. But we are taught out of listening to our inner voice, our instinct, our gut feelings. And yet we have gut feelings. And we've all had the experience of not listening to a gut feeling and regretting it later. Everyone has. We've also had moments where we could not but go with our gut feeling, like my friend Kushal, who walked into one of the Twin Towers on 9/11, go to his work. And the guards were giving orders to stay in the building. And his gut said to run. And he ran, and he saved his life by a hair. Now, what if he had not listened? Because many of us don't listen because we've been trained out of it. We think it's magical thinking, etc. But if you look at the research, my colleague Joseph Michaels, the neuroscientist, has looked at intuition as sort of a feeling, right? Because you always have a feeling. I have a feeling I should do this, but it doesn't make any sense. And what he looked at was decision making. And he said, when do people make the best decisions? Well, it turns out when things are complicated, when you have a complex decision to make, going with your gut is going to help you make a better decision. So for example, let's say you have a broken kettle and you need to buy a new kettle. That's not a hard decision. Yeah, you know what to do. But if it's complex, like I have this new job offer in a different city, should I move there? I have to move my house. I have to move my kids and move the schools and do this. It's complicated. There are a lot of things at play. Going with your gut feeling, going with your feelings is actually going to help you make a better decision. His neuroscience research has shown. And the military has been studying this for decades. And in fact, there was a movie that made fun of the program called Men Who Stare at Goats.
I remember that.
But you know what? There's a new research program going on right now, top secret. I know it is top secret because I have talked to people in the military who know about it. Even they were not able to get me of the scientists because it's kept under wraps. But there were so many soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq saying that they had saved their own lives or the lives of others because of a feeling. Oh, why didn't you drive down that road? Even though the command was given, I had a feeling I shouldn't. And boom, they saved their own lives or they saved the lives of other people. that the military has decided to keep studying this because intuition can increase performance, can save lives. It's huge. There's so much about the brain that we don't know. If we can harness our ability to pay attention to those intuitive faculties, that can help us. That's tremendous. And what Joseph Michaels often shares is just when he has to make a decision, he's like, well, I consult my rational, reasonable mind, but I also consult my feelings. So sovereignty is not necessarily always going with your intuition, but at least making room for it and learning to listen to it as well.
I love that so much, Emma, and I resonate with that so deeply. I primarily work with kind of alpha males of Silicon Valley, the guys who say, I'm only here because I'm at the behest of my wife, at the behest of my boss, something like that. I don't necessarily believe in therapy. You've got 50 minutes to prove me otherwise. And we do great. What I'm driving at here is I ended up doing my first TEDx talk on emotions that data men miss. That was the title. And you're talking about intuition as being a data source, just like emotions. And then I think about Marsha Linehan and her idea of wise mind. For those of you who are not familiar, she's the mother of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a fabulous form of therapy that's been effective with very hard to treat clients with borderline personality disorder or bipolar, a host of indications. But she has this idea of wise mind, which is kind of this lovely Venn diagram, this confluence of using the best part of your brain and the best part of your emotional. And you're suggesting, and I think it's so important that there be a third circle, and that is, what about intuition? Because sometimes it's almost like that Malcolm Gladwell blink. We don't know why, but we know it's wrong, or we know it's right. I knew for sure when I'd met my wife that she was my wife. I knew it intuitively. Of course, I could have had that notion disproved, but 22 years later, we have no evidence for that. What I'm driving at is, yeah, and somebody might say, well, yeah, a broken clock is right twice a day, and that's akin to the intuition. You're saying statistically that is not the case, and I would agree.
And also, I've seen in India, there's an organization that has started training kids in intuition. And I've seen with my own eyes things that I never thought I would see. And kids, it turns out, when you don't deprogram someone in childhood by making them think only reason and rationality are to be used, children have a very strong aptitude to develop intuition. And it's actually shocking to see what they can do. But I've seen it with my own eyes. And it's a new field of research, very new, very controversial, because it would stand psychology on its head. We always feel that we don't have room for that. And psychologists, even big psychologists like Daryl Bem, who published on this topic, were laughed at, were ridiculed. And yet there are things that we can see, that I've seen, that the military is seeing, that you can't question that. The one person I did interview for my book from the military, he said, these people are coming back with more than 50% chance of being right. So it's bigger than chance. And that's why there was this research started to be developed.
It's interesting. I'm listening to describe these very high level operations like in the military. And just last night, just talk about a really interesting synchronicity between us at the moment. I was rewatching for the cajillionth time, because this is like my comfort food. I was watching Scrubs. It happened to be the episode where Turk, the starring surgeon, asks the attending surgeon, am I the best in the room? And he said, no, Todd is. Todd is the jock, the guy who's always doing high fives and just stupid jokes. And well, I think they're very funny. Well, my fourth grade self does. But he said, the problem with you is you think too much. Todd really works intuitively. And obviously, you're not going to want a surgeon to come in and say, I just use my intuition, blah, blah, blah. You, of course, want them to have hours of deliberate practice. But after that, after the hours of deliberate practice, it's where that science becomes an art, that kind of moment. And it takes a long time to get there. It takes a lot of deliberate practice. You don't become Miles Davis or Prince overnight, let alone a great surgeon. But to your point, I love thinking about the hours it takes. Anders Ericsson, he was the one who influenced the idea of the 10,000 hours, but he took great issue with the way it was depicted by Malcolm Gladwell. But the concept was deliberate practice. And I would think that deliberate practice allows us to eventually become intuitive and more artistic.
Yes. And also one more thing is that we know that we're most likely to be intuitive and to get innovative insights. And Einstein knew this well. When we're in this alpha wave mode, and when the brain is not highly focused and when it's not so lethargic, it's about to fall asleep, but in that in-between space. Your brain, that's the alpha waves. And that is when we're most likely to come up with our aha moments. And everyone needs to experience this. When do you come up with solutions to problems? People will be like, oh, in the shower, or when I'm taking a walk, or right? It's in those moments when you're not actively focused. And yet right now in our society, we could be actively focused every single second of the day, thanks to our phones, right? We're constantly on something.
Wouldn't that be amazing to be in that zone?
So we are robbing ourselves and our children when we stick them on a device all day long from the ability to be in a mind space where we can access our innovative genius, where we can access insights we wouldn't otherwise have, and intuitions. And even if you have a workplace where you do that, where people are constantly in go mode, you're robbing them of the opportunity to be innovative. And yet that is what every CEO wants in their employees. But when you think about kids too, they are the most creative people on the planet are kids. If you allow them to go into that space, unless you overprogram them or overscreen them or over whatever. And that is something, that's a bound state. Because when we're in our sovereign state, we have access to those insights. We have access to those moments. So one thing I encourage is take time without your phone, where you're meditating, where you're taking a walk, unplugged, all these things. One of my favorite research studies showed that if you put a group of people into nature without their phones for 3 days, they come back with 50% increased creativity.
Jeez.
It's so huge when you think about it.
And so basically, I find myself thinking about a lot of things as you're talking. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to meld them. The first one is that song by Supertramp, the Logical Song. And in it, the lyrics are heartbreaking. It's describing this, what I perceive anyway, to be this boy who realizes that in this world, he's going to have to learn to be logical, and he's not going to be anything but practical and boring. And it's so important to be logical and practical, and it's so important to be intuitive and creative. And I don't hear you denouncing us being reasonable. You're a scientist. That's
Of course,
the height of reason. Yet you're saying, and there's more. We're missing out if we do that to the exclusion of walking around without our shoes on in nature for 3 days, or we're going to boost our creativity, at the exclusion of meditation and perhaps sky breathing, as you love. I know you love it. And you mentioned it in our last conversation, and you mentioned it in your book. In this case, there are so many things that are lost if we don't attend to this as well. And I don't hear it as a this or that. I hear you really endorsing a this and that for us to become more sovereign.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in a space, in a place with so much noise, you have to be so deliberate about making sure there's time for that. Whatever it is, sovereign hours during the day when you don't have a phone, sovereign morning, sovereign evening, sovereign moments when you go outside and just walk with no stimulation.
Well, my new friend, I'm going to have to close, but let me ask you my final magical question. I asked it to you last time, but I'm going to ask it again. On this day, Emma, if you had the power to confer upon all humanity one strength or one insight that would dramatically improve the lives of individuals as well as perhaps society at large, what would that insight or skill be? And how do you imagine it would impact the individual as well as perhaps society at large?
I mean, here with regard to sovereignty, I would say discernment, the word that you love so much as well. The ability to see beyond. The other day I was having a conversation with a 16-year-old who has been meditating since he was 8.
Oh my God.
He's in a family where that was encouraged. And I said to him, how do you feel that you're different from other kids? And he said, well, they want big cars, big houses, this, that. And I kind of see through it. And he is sovereign. And I'm like, so what are you interested in? He said, I'm interested in learning. I'm curious about stuff. And he's doing, that he's excited about stuff. But he is not falling for the things. He's not falling for the things that we know don't bring us anything. He has discernment. He has a sovereign mind. And he's 16. And it's amazing because even talking to him and looking in his face, there was so much kindness in his eyes. You could see, and apparently his teachers talk about that. You could see how he lives from the heart and he lives with sovereignty and gentleness. He sees through things. And how many of adults still are chasing the imaginary carrot that they think will be the answer to all things, that when they get it, inevitably nothing happens. I mean, you see this probably in your clients who are very successful and yet not sovereign. And so that would be my wish for people.
Emma, I'm so glad that I got to geek out with you on being sovereign. And I'm so glad that you're contributing with this gift to the readers and to my listeners so that they may be more sovereign as well. This has been a blast. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Adam. This has been my favorite podcast to be on.
Oh, this is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe